Fast and Furious or Harry Potter?
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious or The Lord of the Rings?
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious or Star Wars?
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious or Jurassic Park?
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious or Marvel Avengers?
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious or James Bond?
James Bond.
James Bond or The Dark Knight?
James Bond.
James Bond or Indiana Jones?
James Bond.
James Bond or Pirates of the Caribbean?
James Bond.
James Bond or The Hunger Games?
James Bond.
James Bond or The Matrix?
James Bond again.
James Bond or Back to the Future?
James Bond.
James Bond or The Godfather?
James Bond.
James Bond or Toy Story?
That's hitting childhood feels, that. It's going to have to be James Bond again.
James Bond or Die Hard?
James Bond.
James Bond or Forrest Gump?
James Bond.
James Bond or Shawshank Redemption?
James Bond.
James Bond or The Terminator?
James Bond.
James Bond or Ghostbusters?
James Bond.
James Bond or Home Alone?
James Bond.
James Bond it is. Cool.